Hey everybody, this is my 29-gallon miscellaneous tank, and I call it that because way back in the day when I first got really interested in fish keeping, I suddenly realized one day that I was not limited to a single 10-gallon tank in my office and that I could in fact have more than one tank. And so I bought a really big tank. I bought this big 29-gallon tank, and I started enjoying the fish keeping hobby, and I started putting fish in here, and this fish and that fish and those fish and these fish, and this tank went through a lot of iterations in my first year to year and a half of fish keeping before it sort of settled in on what you see now. And as it settled in on what you see now, by about 2012, maybe 2013, somewhere in that time frame, I had settled in on some angelfish, and one of them was a beautiful turquoise angelfish, and the other was just a mixed veil or a mixed angelfish, whatever, that I'd gotten from PetSmart for $4 or $5, whatever it was. And a lot of fish have come and gone in this tank. It's been a fairly stable tank over the years, but I have had a lot of smaller fish come and go. All of those skirt tetras you see darting around, with the exception of the blue one. All of those black skirt tetras, the long fin ones, they're fairly new. They've been in there for a few months now. But 2 days ago, I found a dead angelfish in here. It was the smaller of the two. It was kind of a runt. It had only been in the tank for a few years. It actually is the one that replaced my turquoise angelfish when she died. But when I bought her as a full-grown adult, so getting a couple of years out of her before she faded away and died was okay. I already knew that I was taking a chance. I had no idea how old she was when I bought her. My other female, however, I bought as a baby, and I've watched her grow up, and I've had her in this tank for probably 5 to 6 years now. And I don't know if you've noticed her or not, but there she is down on the bottom. She's still alive, but barely. I noticed her last night swimming kind of on her side, looking a little listless. I was in here doing a water change, and she just didn't look right at all. And then when I came down this morning, I couldn't find her. I was looking all over the place. I was even looking on the surface to see if she was floating. And it took me a few minutes. I was looking at the tank from this angle, and she's almost impossible to see when you're looking at it from that angle. It wasn't until I stood up and looked down that I actually noticed her lying on the bottom. So this tank is no longer housing my angelfish. I'm going to pull her out of there and euthanize her after this video. It's no point in leaving her in there. She's just lying on the bottom with her gills flapping, so, you know, she's kind of reached the end of the line. But I got about at least 5, maybe close to 6 years out of her. And also, I always have to keep in mind that being one of my earlier fish, she made it through a lot of my earlier mistakes and my overenthusiasm and my experiments with hydrogen peroxide, and a lot of the fish that never made it through my early years of fish keeping, but she did. And again, it feels like sort of the end of an era. I'm losing my Moonlight Gourami currently. She is in the process of fading away too. She's got a swim bladder issue, and again, it's just going to be a matter of time. When I came in this morning, she was lying completely on her side. She was asleep, but when she goes to sleep, she just lies on her side. It takes effort for her to sit up like that. And then, of course, now that I'm over here, she's going to try to get up to the surface to get some food or something, but there's not going to be any for her. So you can see that's, you know, she's not long for this world either. So that is the last gourami. That is the original batch of gouramis, which is where this tank got its name, the Gourami tank. So my original gourami is going. My original angelfish are going. I also found 2 dead fish in my 125 yesterday, and I found a dead tiger barb in my black ghost knife fish tank this morning. So I don't know what's going on, but it's been a rough 2 days down here in the fish room. Now, I don't suspect anything unusual. There's no outbreak, there's no virus, there's no nothing like that's going on. This is simply old age. The other fish that died in here, the other angelfish that died in here a couple days ago, had been fading for a while and was always sort of a thin, you know, sort of a little runt fish that never really grew up properly. So I got about 3 years out of that one. I'm kind of surprised about that. So again, nothing unusual. It just seems like the timing is very coincidental that all this is sort of winding down at the same time, which is what gives it that feeling of being the end of an era. You know, all these original fish are sort of passing, and it's time to sort of start rethinking my tanks and moving on. So we'll see. This does open up the possibility for some different stuff going on. Fortunately, I've not lost anybody in this tank. Most of the fish in this tank are only within a few years old. This Synodontis catfish down here, this Lucipinus that you can maybe see moving around in the Anubias back there, I've had that one for quite a few years in this tank. It was the lone survivor. I had 8 of them in this tank at one point. And I took some bad advice about using RO water, and I killed 7 of the 8 along with quite a few other fish in this tank on that one particular disastrous water change. But that one survived, and I've still got it 5 years later. So that little Synodontis in there is one of my way back original fish. But otherwise, this tank is all fairly new fish. This tank likewise is structurally, you know, it's designed the way I set it up originally. It's got all the wood and plants and rocks and everything the way I set it up, but the fish in here are all fairly new. The black ghost knifefish is the oldest one in here, and we never see that one anyway, so it doesn't really matter. This morning I found a dead tiger barb in this tank, and I've got 1 tiger barb left. So I was originally thinking I could put an angelfish in here. I have one upstairs in my office tank that needs to be rehomed, and I thought that this tank would be great to have an angelfish in it. I've actually tried to put angelfish in this tank before, but the tiger barbs made that impossible. So I'm down to 1 tiger barb, and I can either try to catch that tiger barb and put that somewhere else, and then I can open this tank up for an angelfish, or since my 29 now has no angelfish at all in it, I can simply move that angelfish from my office tank to my angelfish tank, which is probably what I'm going to do. Nothing really to talk about with my native tank here, and as far as the topic of this video being, you know, losing fish and whatnot. I do believe that I've lost all my crayfish in this tank over time. That's just something that happens, you know. They're prey animals in the wild, and this is a, you know, pseudo-native tank, and they get preyed upon in the tank. So, you know, that just happens over time. I tend to not have crayfish in here, and we'll go out and we'll catch some if it ever stops raining again, because that's just what it does now. It rains all the time. So if we ever get a break from the rain, I'll get out there and we'll see if we can get some more crayfish in this tank. And we may as well make this just a little mini round the world update. Nothing going on in my my gudgeon tank. I do need to get in here and do some maintenance on it. You can see my gudgeon up here. I've not seen the rubber lip pleco in this tank in quite a while, but I can see by how nice and bright and clear and shiny all the rocks and everything are that I think it's pretty unlikely that the rubber lip has died. I'm sure it's still in there. We just don't see it very often. And then, of course, my little Bumblebee Catfish that I never even talk about anymore lives down here in this dark corner, and it still is alive too. I saw its little face sticking out the other day, so it's still in there. And that too is one of my fish from way back. Maybe not one of my original, but I've had that one for quite a few years now. Now, my 125, I do actually have a few things to talk about on this one, since we're going to be doing sort of a mini around the world update. I did lose a couple fish in this tank yesterday. My long-finned, white-tipped Bristlenose Pleco that I had in this tank for several years, I found dead. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But I also found one of my female Congo Tetras dead. One of those sort of orangey ones, her. One like that I found dead. Now that I was expecting. These, again, are fairly old. They go back to my original African tank, which is now my black ghost knifefish tank. So these are probably about 5 years old too. And the one was just fading. It was getting, you know, its color was washing out, and it was getting old, and it's, you know, started getting bloated a little bit, and its eyes started getting all goofy, and then, you know, it faded away and died. So that's about the third one of them I've lost in the last year. And so my population of Congo Tetras is sort of fading away. I'm down to that one male and a few females. And this female right here doesn't even look all that good either. She's got some rough spots on her. Her colors are kind of fading. Her eyes are starting to look a little less bright. So she might be kind of winding down too. So once again, sort of an end of an era for my original population. But those are all my smaller fish. The original inhabitants are my Synodontis right there and my Tenopoma right here, and both of which tend to be a little bit longer lived fish. So while I might lose all those Congo Tetras, I should certainly keep my Tenopoma for a few more years, and then of course the catfish might live for quite a few more years. So my Bristlenose Pleco, speaking of living for quite a few years, that one too should have lived for quite a while. And it died after about 3 years. I found it dead in the tank the other day. But I will say that I was thinking about it last night, and I remember about 2 weeks ago, the last time I remember seeing it, I remember it had a really, really long, stringy white poop hanging out of it. And I remember thinking, you know, it's kind of odd. Out of all the time I've had that fish and all the years I've had that fish, it's almost always had long, white, stringy poop. And I never thought too much about it until the other day when I was doing the water change and I found the dead fish. I also found a big, long, stringy white poop floating in the tank, which is what made me think about it. And so now I'm wondering if it didn't die after 3 years because all of the time I had it, it was sick. It was struggling with internal, gut parasites or gut bacteria problems or something like that. Long, stringy white poop is generally a sign of some sort of digestional illness. And it looked like that for its entire life, and that's kind of one of the reasons I never worried about it. That's just how it was. It always sort of looked that way. And it grew, and it had good colors, and its fins were beautiful, and, whatever. I just never really paid that much attention to it. So, in retrospect, perhaps I should have pulled that out of there, quarantined it, given it some meds or something like that, and it could have been as simple as that. I could have simply cleared up whatever, internal issues it was having, and put it back in the tank, and it might have been fine, and I might have got 15 or 20 years life out of that fish. So, lesson learned. I definitely will, keep in mind when I see that stringy white poop to pay more attention to it, and that's what I'm going to chalk up the loss of that fish to. My Angelfish tank down here, I'm happy to say I've not lost any fish in this tank. This one is a fairly new tank. All of the inhabitants in it are fairly new, so not really a lot to talk about on this tank in regards to any of my sort of end of the era theme that we're going with here. And likewise for my quarantine tank down there, it just has my little one resident guppy in there that she's just been in there for a long time. And then of course my figure 8 puffer tank, my brackish tank here. Nothing going on in this one either to speak of. Butterbean is still doing fine. The tank is still ticking over okay. This tank started out long ago as a 20 long open top. If you look far enough back on my brackish tank playlist, you'll get to see some really cool videos of Butterbean when he was younger and what the tank looked like when it was open top, and I had all kind of other fish in here, rainbow fish mixed in with him. And so Butterbean's gone through quite, a lot of changes, and he's seen a lot of changes in his, I'm going to say, 5-year lifespan, maybe 4-year lifespan that I've had him. I guess he's about 4. I didn't get Butterbean until I had been, I'd gotten sort of a lot of the earlier fish keeping stuff out of my system and was getting a little more serious about it by the time I bought Butterbean and decided I was going to venture into brackish water. But I did venture into the brackish water fairly early on in my fish keeping. So Butterbean, I'm going to say, is probably 4. And then that, of course, brings us all the way back to my 29 Miscellaneous. That was interesting, seeing that loach way up near the top of the tank like that. They usually don't forage so high up in the water column. I do see them in the water column, but not near the top of the tank like that, so that was kind of interesting. So there she is. She moved around a little bit. She made her way to the other side of the tank. So as I said, she's still alive. You can see her gills are moving, but not by much. So sorry for the bummer of the video, but that's kind of the way it goes. Just depends on how you want to look at it, whether it's a bummer or not. You know, everything passes sooner or later, so instead of being sad about it, just see it as the sort of end of a chapter, the turning of a page, and now we'll get to move on and see what this tank can become. Of course, I'm just going to replace it. You know, I'm just going to put another angelfish in this tank, so it's not like there's going to be some big change of a new tank or something like that, because I'm just going to have another angelfish in this tank. But we'll see what happens. As I said, I've got some other fish moving on and changing, so we are really kind of at the end of an era. So thanks again for watching. Make sure you're subscribed, that way you won't miss any of the changes that are coming up, or any of the new additions, or anything else. You never know what it's going to be with me. So thanks again for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you real soon on the next one.